وعلى هامش أعمال الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة نذهب لمتابعة مؤتمر للمركز المصري للفكر والدراسات الاستراتيجية ومعهد الشرق الأوسط.
And into the Arabian Sea, not just the Persian Gulf, the attack on the Saudi oil pipeline that again demonstrated their ability to interdict the flow of oil outside the Strait of Hormuz. That was followed by the shoot down of the U.S. drone, followed, of course, by what we saw just a few days ago, which was the attack on Upcade. So where we are now is that we have this escalating series of exchanges between the U.S. and Iran. While Paul believes that perhaps there's not going to be a U.S. response, I think that it's too early to make that judgment, that we don't know where the U.S. is going to come out. We saw that Secretary Pompeo met with his counterparts at the GCC this morning, and to discuss, as well as, of course, Egypt and Jordan, so it was a GCC +2. To talk about some of these issues, and there will be a continuation of discussions between the U.S. and our core partners in the region before we decide what the response is going to be. So this is a developing situation, and I would throw in the last point, which is, again, Paul touched on it, but I think it's critically important, and that is what's happening domestically in the United States. What are the implications of the House of Representatives' declaration that they are going to be opening an inquiry into the impeachment of Donald Trump? How is he going to respond? What we've seen in the past, if you go back to the Clinton administration and the impeachment of Bill Clinton, if you go back to the Nixon administration and the potential impeachment of Richard Nixon, what we've seen in terms of behavior in the past is that presidents under that kind of threat will turn to foreign policy as a way of changing the narrative, and also of demonstrating the importance and significance of a president in a time of crisis, in order to undercut the domestic political drive for impeachment. And so we might very well see that what we're going to enter into at this particular moment is a Donald Trump who is more inclined, more interested in spiraling up international conflict, international tensions, as a way of removing some of the domestic pressure on himself, given his lack of predictability that we've seen over the last 3 years. That is something that I think bears close watching. Let me stop.
Thank you, Jerry. Very thoughtful. You did violate the 10-minute mark, so no coffee for you. Dr. Ahmed Khan, please.
Thank you, Bilal. Thank you very much. I'm honored to participate in this panel. I will talk about two major strategic developments that are taking place in the region, and will end with a few words about Egypt and how Egypt perceives these changes. Unfortunately, I will have to repeat some of the points touched on by Paul, Dr. Khaled, Dr. Abdel Menam, and Ambassador Jerry, and I think this is a good starting point that at least we agree on some of the changes that are taking place in the region, either you see them from Washington, New York, or from Cairo. The first strategic change is the shrinking American interest in the region, and also the lack of American leadership on, I think, globally, but more particularly in the Middle East. This is obviously not a new development. I think it started with Obama. There are many reasons for that. I think Trump articulated one reason for that in his press conference with the Bahraini Crown Prince a few days ago, when he said the U.S. does not need oil or gas from the Middle East. Statistics actually support that. Believe it or not, the U.S. Today is the biggest producer of oil and is one of the biggest exporters of oil. I think in last June, the U.S. was #1 exporter of oil, and then Saudi Arabia took over again. So that's one reason we don't need oil, so why risk the lives of our sons, why invest money there and so on. The second reason is related to Trump's concept of great power rivalry, especially with China. I think Trump does not believe this competition with China or with Russia is taking place in the Middle East. Maybe it's taking place in other places like Asia, so divert resources and attention from the Middle East to Asia. A third reason is related to terrorism and what Trump claims to be the defeat of terrorism, the defeat of ISIS, and also the emergence of new kind of domestic terrorism in the U.S. that is actually not related to the Middle East or Sunni terrorism and so on. So the U.S. even is not that much interested in the issue of terrorism in the region. A final reason for that is Trump's notion that allies should do more to defend themselves. So, in conclusion, there is less interest, American interest in the Middle East. The U.S. is less concerned with the development that are taking place in the region, and there are an American leadership vacuum in the region. The second development related to that first development is the American leadership vacuum and the inability of other great powers like China or Russia to fill this vacuum led to what I call the regionalization of the Middle East. So today, regional dynamics are more important than global dynamics in the Middle East. Regional powers like Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and to some extent Egypt are more influential, more important in the region than global powers like US, China, and Russia. So this is definitely an era of regional powers in the Middle East, or an era of middle powers. I argue this is an era of middle powers globally, but more particularly in the Middle East. Another important development, and that was touched on also, I think, by Paul, is the decline in importance of traditional conflicts and threats, such as the Arab-Israeli conflict, terrorism associated with Sunni Islam, and the increasing importance of the Iranian question, which is considered now by many Middle Eastern countries as the main issue of the region and the main source of conflict and tension. The last strategic development or geostrategic development that's taking place in the region that I'm going to talk about is the emerging importance of some sub-regions in the Middle East. And by that I mean the Red Sea area and the Eastern Mediterranean area. The Red Sea is becoming an area of competition between regional and global powers. Many Arab countries and global powers now have their own military presence there. They have their own military bases in the region, and they're competing for access and power in this area. The other important region is the Eastern Mediterranean, the discovery of natural gas in the region, has definitely created dynamics for conflict as well as dynamics for cooperation. We see the tension between Turkey and Cyprus on the one hand, and the cooperation between Egypt, Greece, Cyprus, Jordan, and Palestinian Authority also on developing gas resources, an important development in that context with the creation of the natural gas forum in Cairo, which will work on helping the countries with this forum develop their natural gas, invest in infrastructure and so on. And I think the mandate of this forum will not focus only on economic cooperation. I think there will be some kind of a spillover effect from economic cooperation to other areas of cooperation between these countries in the region. More importantly, there has been actually interest from global powers in those two areas, the Red Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean, and Japanese are talking about that, Americans are talking about that. They are trying to link what they call Indo-Pacific strategy with the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. They talk about connectivity between the two areas. You cannot reach the Atlantic without going through the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. So I think these are very important developments. Finally, a few words about Egypt's approach toward the region. Given the instability in the region and its protracted conflicts, Egypt's approach to regional crises has been one of caution, advocating political settlement while avoiding any military involvement that could drag the country into conflict. The second important point is that Egypt wants to play a role of partner in the region and not the role of a leader of the region. I think Foreign Minister Shukri said explicitly in 2016 that Egypt is not seeking leadership, or riyada in Arabic. We do not want to be a leader of anyone. We want to be a partner in a way that preserves common interests. In this context, Egypt has given priority to forging partnership with Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And this trilateral partnership is also an interesting development in the region. This trilateral partnership has been active on several regional issues such as Libya, Yemen, the Palestinian issue, and of course Qatar. Nevertheless, Egypt does not see eye to eye on all these regional issues with its partners Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. A third point in Egypt's approach to the region is what Egyptian officials call or describe as the state is the solution. Collapsed and weak states have contributed to regional instability. Sorry, I'm finishing in 1 minute. So the Egyptians argue that there is a need to rebuild the state. There is a need to revive states' institution, and this will lead to solutions of many of the conflicts in the region. My final point here is what I call outside help is welcome. For many years, Egypt has rejected interference in the internal affairs of the region, but recently it has welcomed outside help from outside of the region, meaning diplomatic initiatives by countries like the US and Russia in resolving regional conflicts through diplomatic initiatives. Egypt believes that leaving conflicts to regional dynamics, to regional powers alone, will further complicate rather than solve these conflicts. And I will end with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very rich and comprehensive. I think Paul is next.
Thank you, Bilal.
These were really all extremely rich and excellent presentations by our colleagues. I want to focus forward. I want to focus on the future and where can we go and where should we go from here. And I will posit that the place we want to get to is a stable regional order, a regional order that is state-based, a regional order based on states that are sustainable, that are reformed in such a way that they're not precarious, presiding over societies that are also, ideally they'd be very prosperous, but at least, enough of their human and socioeconomic security is assured so that they are stable, societies moving forward, and all of this on a sustainable environmental and resource base. That's where I think we want to be headed. What is that? Where are we now towards these goals, and what does it mean? I'll start first with the regional order. As I mentioned, there is no regional order. There's no Arab order, there's no Gulf order, there is no order with the non-Arab states that when I mentioned, Israel, Turkey, and Iran. For a long time we relied on outside powers to deal with them. We relied on the US to deliver Arab-Israeli peace. Great, see where that's brought us. Totally unrealistic. The Gulf relied on the US to deal with Iran. Nothing but empowering Iran, and things are getting worse by the week. And Turkey maybe is a different case. In this context, whether Egypt takes the leading role or not, Egypt is a big state. It's the biggest Arab state. Of course, it can't do it alone, but I think it does have a leadership role. I will note that things in the region have not been great since Egypt left its leadership role in 1978, 79, and there's been no replacement to the role that Egypt played. In practical terms, I think that it probably needs to be an Arab coalition. I would imagine Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE to start with, need to deal with the internal intra-Arab divisions, primarily at least move first on the divisions within the Gulf, but then pivot to the three main non-Arab state actors. We know that Egypt has a track with Israel. We know that the Gulf countries have some relationship that they're still not sure about. But the goal should be for the Arab coalition to engage and not to rely on the US, to engage on behalf of the Palestinians and on behalf of the issue of Jerusalem, which even if it's not currently maybe causing enormous problems, the issue of Jerusalem is something that will cause problems for decades and centuries to come. It cannot be an element of a stable peace as it is going now. So I think the Arab states should not rely on Jared Kushner, but rely on themselves, not hesitate to engage with Israel, but to engage with a very clear purpose, which is, yes, we want to at some point accept Israel as a state in the region, but we have very serious conditions, like we have very serious conditions with Iran. You can't have militias, you can't do this, you can't do that, but we must engage. Turkey is a major player. I think it's very unfortunate that mainly because of the issue of a particular party, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Arab countries, the main Arab countries really have no cooperation with one of the main states in the region, which is Turkey. I think we need to be much more bold and much more mature, and that an Arab coalition should be engaging very seriously with Turkey, with President Erdogan. We have issues like we have with every other country. But this idea of not having relations comes at enormous cost to our region. Thirdly, and maybe currently most importantly, Iran. The Arab states have no path relating to Iran.
no real defense, independent sort of military or defense strategy, and absolutely no diplomatic track with Iran. Again, reliance on the US. Again, we don't talk to them. We have disagreements with them. Again, I think this is a failure of Arab diplomacy and Arab leadership. I know that the Iranian public stands in a very different place than many in the Iranian government or Iranian regime, state stand. That's something we can take advantage of. And I think as neighbors, for hundreds of years and for the next hundreds of years, the Arab countries, maybe with Turkey at some point, need to engage with the Iranian public, the Iranian government, the Iranian parliament, and find a way forward, and be tough negotiators and maybe tough fighters. Negotiation doesn't mean weakness, it means we're trying to get to a result. So regional order is something that we need to put as a goal, and we need to be having an end result where it's an inclusive regional order. Yes, the Arab League, the Arab order can remain, but there needs to be another layer, which includes Iran and Turkey and Israel in a wider Middle East architecture, where we understand each other, where we negotiate, where we push back on each other peacefully and not through proxy wars and failed states and so forth. Now, I've said that this regional order needs to be an order of states. Right now, as everybody has mentioned, there's a number of states that have disappeared or failed, and others that might be in danger of doing so. This means quite clearly that those that have failed, we need to attend to the civil wars that are there and try to do our best to bring them to an end. We've talked a lot about Yemen. We haven't mentioned that much, maybe about Libya. Both Yemen and Libya are resolvable. They are complicated, like all civil wars, domestic issues, regional issues, but they are solvable. They are not impossible situations. Syria may be more difficult because of the position, basically, of the Assad regime. Maybe more difficult to get there. But we should, in the next year or two, at least end the civil war in Yemen and Libya and begin rebuilding states in those two countries. Dealing with Syria might be more difficult. Our actors partly have taken advantage of places where states have collapsed. So by ending civil wars and rebuilding states, that partly deals with the issue of armed non-state actors. Another part of it relates to Iran. Iran maintains, builds, and promotes a number of armed non-state actors, and that's where the engagement with Iran needs to put that very seriously on the table. So we need to focus, and Egypt has always emphasized this, President Sisi has always emphasized this, it has to be states and not any other option. The third element of this goal is that you want states that are sustainable, states that are stable states, not any state. And that means gets into the issue of what is the socio-economic social contract in these states. Are people happy enough in these states so as not to revolt as they did in the Arab storm or spring of 2011, as they did in Algeria and Sudan even just recently, and some movements even in Egypt in the last few weeks. So simply having a state does not mean it's a stable and sustainable state. So that when we talk about states, they have to be reformed states, both politically to my mind and socioeconomically, such that they are sustainable states and stable states. Political reform will mean different things in different countries. The Emirates are a special case. Saudi Arabia is a special case. Egypt, everybody's a special case. In some, simple economic progress and centralized authority is enough. I fear that in Egypt it's not enough. I think in some of the bigger countries, the aspirations of the public to be heard and to be part of decision making is incontrovertible and is an element of stability. I think that for Egypt that means rethinking. I'll be very blunt. I think the economic decisions have been absolutely necessary, very bold, course, they come at a cost, and we know that. There's been a lot of instability. But I think the Egyptian leadership should indicate that there is actually a serious movement towards at least partial democratization. One could think of hybrid systems of participatory, autocratic, hybrids. Spain went through that for a lot of periods. Turkey did that for a long time. But this idea that full authoritarianism can be restored and is sustainable, as a political scientist, I think it is not. It's dangerous and it risks explosion. So when we talk about a regional order of states, I'm implying a regional order of intelligent, reformed, flexible, sustainable states. The fourth element is stable societies. Happy enough societies. Of course, that means different things in different places, but that absolutely means the socioeconomic, the social contract, the challenges of employment, of housing, of health, all of the issues that we're all very well aware of. They become particularly acute in a country like Egypt, which has very high demographic growth, which is already 90 to 100 million, which is going to be 120 million, 130, 140 million, with still high levels of unemployment and not a very clear path to rapid growth like we saw maybe in China previously or East Asia. So stable societies do mean a political pathway, but they most importantly mean a social and economic pathway. And the challenges in the decade ahead are huge. The number of jobs that need to be created are tremendous. And we still don't know what the impact is going to be of robotics, of artificial intelligence, or even the West is fearing that a lot of jobs are going to disappear because of technology. So the challenges are real. And the final element I will mention about the future that we want to get to is sustainable resources and environmental conditions. And that's particularly meaningful in the Middle East, particularly meaningful in Egypt. We are already the warmest place on earth. We will become much warmer. There will be regions which will no longer be inhabitable. We are the driest region on earth. We will become drier. We have the tightest agricultural land. It will become tighter. We have among the highest demographic growth. We need to deal with that. We produce a lot of the fossil fuels that the world consumes, but those fossil fuels are burning us in terms of their environmental impact. This is already having effects on food security, on agricultural sectors. It will impact parts of the Egyptian Delta, definitely, and other parts of coastal areas. So, of course, this is a debate in the U.S. where the government and President Trump says, climate change is a hoax. But in the Middle East, we cannot afford to say that, and we have to take it into consideration.